Just moments ago, the entire House of Commons fell into stunned silence because Nigel Farage suddenly rose from his seat, slammed his papers onto the bench, and delivered a demand that sent shockwaves through the room. MPs froze, ministers looked at each other in disbelief, and within seconds, whispers spread like wildfire. Had Farage really just challenged the government head on? Had he truly called for something no one expected to hear inside Parliament today? An immediate national election? What happened next left even his critics speechless. Chaos had been brewing inside the House of Commons all morning. Ministers shuffled their papers with uneasy hands, backbenchers exchanged tense glances, and journalists in the gallery sensed that something unusual was about to unfold. But no one, absolutely no one, expected Nigel Farage to rise with such force, command the entire chamber, and ignite a moment that would dominate every headline within minutes. It started with a single motion, Farage leaning forward, gripping the edge of his bench, his eyes locked on the government front row. The chamber buzzed with low chatter, but the moment Farage stood, the atmosphere tightened like a rope being pulled at both ends. His voice cut through the noise, sharp and unshaken. He spoke of a country exhausted, a public losing patience, and a government drifting without direction. He laid out each point like a hammer strike: rising costs, border pressures, public services cracking under strain, and a growing sense of distrust spreading across the nation. MPs shifted uncomfortably. Some frowned, others leaned in, sensing that he was building up towards something bigger, something explosive. Then, with a sudden intensity, Farage accused the government of hiding behind excuses and delaying decisions that should have been made months ago. He claimed the people were being kept in the dark, forced to accept a government that had lost its momentum and its mandate. The tension rose as murmurs spread across the chamber. A few ministers pretended to take notes, though their hands trembled slightly. Even those who disagreed with Farage could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on the room, and then it happened. Farage lifted his papers, held them in the air, and declared, loud enough for every corner of Parliament to hear, that the current government no longer represented the will of the British people. He accused them of failing to control the chaos spreading across the nation. He called their promises empty. He said the public deserved honesty, stability, and a government strong enough to face the storms ahead. His words echoed off the ancient walls, bouncing back into the stunned silence of MPs who didn't know whether to interrupt or simply let the speech continue. In that silence, Farage delivered the line that would send shockwaves across the country. If this government cannot lead, then the British people must choose who can. And they must choose now. I demand an immediate general election. The chamber erupted. MPs shouted from every side, some in outrage, some in disbelief, others in support. The speaker stood, calling for order, but the room had already ignited into a frenzy. Ministers whispered urgently among themselves, trying to process whether Farage's challenge was symbolic theatre or a direct threat to the government's stability. Cameras zoomed in. Microphones captured every tremor of the eruption. The energy felt electric, dangerous, and unpredictable. Yet Farage stood still at the centre of it all, unmoving, his expression firm, as if he had just dropped a weight that none of them were prepared to lift. One thing became instantly clear: this moment would not disappear quietly. It would send ripples far beyond Parliament into newspapers, living rooms, social media feeds, and conversations across Britain. Because once a demand like that is made publicly inside the very heart of the nation's democracy, it becomes impossible to ignore. The uproar inside the chamber didn't settle quickly. If anything, it intensified. As MPs continued to shout over one another, the speaker's gavel struck the desk again and again, trying desperately to pull the room back under control. But Farage had awakened something deeper, something that had been simmering beneath the political surface for months. It wasn't just his demand that shocked Parliament. It was the blunt truth in his message, a truth many had quietly acknowledged but refused to say aloud. The government benches looked rattled, their faces pale under the harsh lights, as though they were witnessing the beginning of a political storm they could no longer outrun. Every word Farage had spoken seemed to hang in the air, impossible to ignore. Reporters in the press gallery leaned forward, scribbling furiously, already knowing that this scene would dominate the nation's screens by nightfall. Some MPs tried to regain control of the narrative, standing to challenge Farage, accusing him of stirring unnecessary drama. But their voices cracked under pressure. The weight of the moment was too great. Farage didn't respond to them. He didn't need to. His message had already landed like a blow, shaking the Commons and exposing fractures that had been widening for months. Even his critics appeared uneasy, aware that arguing too loudly might only strengthen his claim that the government was falling apart while the country watched helplessly. Meanwhile, conversations spread across the opposition benches. Some MPs whispered fiercely among themselves, questioning whether this unexpected challenge might trigger a chain reaction. Could the government survive another blow to its credibility? Could the public's growing frustration finally reach a breaking point? Each question carried a sense of urgency, as though the entire political system was standing on thin ice, unsure whether the next step would crack it open. Farage's call for an immediate election wasn't merely a political demand, it was a spark thrown into a room full of dry wood. Farage remained standing, his presence unnerving to those who wished he had never spoken. He stared at the government front bench with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. His silence became another form of pressure, forcing ministers to confront what they had hoped to avoid. One minister rose, attempting to defend the government's record, but the words stumbled out in fragments. It was clear they were unprepared. Farage's timing had caught them off guard, and the chamber could feel it. The minister's speech, meant to project strength, instead exposed uncertainty. As he sat down, the room buzzed again, louder than before. Outside Parliament, the reaction was immediate. Phones lit up with notifications. Journalists rushed to broadcast the breaking moment. Social media exploded, with clips of Farage's demands spreading faster than Parliament could regain control. Some viewers cheered, claiming it was about time someone confronted the government. Others expressed fear, worried that calling for an election during a moment of national instability would only deepen the crisis. But regardless of opinion, one thing united the entire country: shock. No one had expected such a direct challenge to be delivered inside the Commons with such force. Inside the chamber, the Speaker finally managed to restore a semblance of order. MPs settled into a tense quiet, though their eyes continued darting toward Farage. Everyone sensed that the government's next move would define the days ahead. Would they dismiss Farage's demand and risk appearing weak? Or would they respond with confidence, risking further backlash from a public already frustrated with the state of the nation? The government front bench exchanged uneasy nods, clearly weighing every option in real time. Farage leaned forward once more, as if preparing for another strike, and the room tensed again. But instead of speaking, he simply placed his papers back on the bench and sat down. That single gesture, quiet, deliberate, sent another wave of whispers through the chamber. It felt as if he were telling them, "I've said what needed to be said, now let the country judge your response." His silence held more power than any second speech could have delivered. And as MPs tried to regain their composure, one truth settled heavily over the chamber. A line had been crossed. A demand had been placed before the nation, and ignoring it would be nearly impossible. The government could delay, argue, or dismiss, but the public had now seen the moment unfold with their own eyes. Farage had thrown down the gauntlet. The question was simple yet terrifying. Would the government pick it up or pretend it wasn't there outside the walls of Parliament? The aftershocks of Farage's demand continued to spread like a wave crashing through the country. Within minutes, news outlets switched to rolling coverage. Analysts scrambled to interpret what had just happened. Crowds began gathering outside Westminster, some holding their phones high, replaying the moment Farage had delivered the challenge that rattled the nation. What started as a single statement inside the Commons had now become a national debate, unfolding across living rooms, offices, streets, and social feeds. People who had grown tired of political uncertainty suddenly felt electrified. Others feared that an abrupt election could push the country into even deeper instability. But whether supportive or alarmed, everyone felt the same thing. Something historic had just been set in motion. Inside Parliament, the mood remained charged long after Farage sat down. Ministers whispered urgently, trying to build a unified response, while opposition MPs exchanged looks of opportunity mixed with caution. This moment could reshape everything: alliances, strategies, and even the direction of the government itself. The Speaker, still trying to maintain order, looked visibly worn from the tension hanging over the chamber. Every MP seemed to understand that the next person to speak would either calm the storm or make it worse, but no one wanted to be the one to step into the spotlight. The silence grew heavier, stretching across the room like a shadow. Then a senior minister slowly rose, clearing his throat. The chamber tensed again. Everyone expected a strong rebuttal, a confident rejection of Farage's demand. But instead, the minister hesitated. His eyes flicked over the crowded benches, and his voice trembled slightly as he defended the government's stability. He insisted that the nation didn't need an immediate election, but his words lacked conviction. Every sentence sounded like it had been assembled in haste without the certainty a moment like this required. MPs shifted in their seats, sensing weakness. The minister tried to continue, but Farage's earlier words hung over him like a shadow he could not escape. Across the opposition benches, MPs watched with sharp eyes. Sensing that the government's footing was slipping, the minister sat down quickly, his face flushed, knowing he had failed to push back with the strength the moment demanded. In contrast, Farage remained composed, his expression unreadable. He didn't need to say another word. The chamber had already absorbed his message. The public had already seen the moment play out, and now the government's response appeared fractured, rushed and unsteady. Exactly the image Farage had warned of. As the debate continued, MPs attempted to shift the conversation, raising different issues, trying to steer attention away from the explosive demand, but nothing worked. Every topic circled back to the same question: was the government strong enough to continue, or had Farage exposed a truth everyone feared, that the leadership was slipping away from them? The government benches looked increasingly anxious as the hours passed. Even MPs who normally defended the administration with confidence now seemed hesitant, careful with their words, unsure how to navigate the growing uncertainty swelling around them. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. Some chanted for change, others held signs demanding stability. The moment had transcended Parliament and become a public confrontation, a tug of war between frustration and fear, hope and caution. Broadcasters interviewed citizens who repeated the same sentiment, whether they agreed with Farage or not. They believed the government owed the country an answer, and soon. The pressure continued to build, and it became clear that ignoring it would only make the crisis worse. Back inside the Commons, the Prime Minister finally stood. The entire chamber fell into a silence so deep it felt heavy, almost physical. Every MP leaned forward. Every camera locked in. The air itself seemed to tighten. The Prime Minister scanned the room slowly, knowing that one wrong sentence could trigger a collapse of confidence. Their response would determine whether the government regained control, or whether Farage's demand would drive Parliament toward an unavoidable showdown. But the Prime Minister didn't offer clarity. Instead, they delivered a cautious, measured statement that avoided giving a direct answer. They insisted the government was stable. They insisted the nation needed continuity. But they did not say no to an election. They did not say yes either. The ambiguity only fed the tension further. MPs exchanged worried glances. The opposition erupted in frustration. And Farage simply watched, already knowing that this unclear response would deepen the uncertainty across the nation. As the chamber descended once again into heated arguments, one truth settled heavily over Westminster. The question of an immediate election was no longer just Farage's demand. It had become the issue gripping every corner of the country, and no matter how hard the government tried to redirect the narrative, the momentum had already shifted. A storm had been set in motion, one that no speech, no delay, and no defence could easily stop. As evening set in over Westminster, the storm inside Parliament spilled into the streets with full force. News vans crowded around the gates, their lights flashing against the ancient stone walls. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, each delivering urgent updates as the political crisis tightened its grip on the nation. The clip of Farage's explosive demand played on repeat across every network, fueling debates that grew louder with each passing hour. But while the country focused on the fiery moment inside the Commons, something even more significant was happening behind closed doors. Private meetings, hurried phone calls, and quiet negotiations unfolding far from the public eye. Inside the Prime Minister's office, advisers paced anxiously, weighing the fallout of the day's events. Some warned that ignoring Farage's challenge could make the government appear weak, especially after such a cautious response in the chamber. Others argued that agreeing to an election would plunge the nation into uncertainty. The Prime Minister listened in silence, hands clasped tightly, aware that whatever decision they made could reshape the entire political landscape. The pressure was immense and the room felt like it was shrinking with every new report coming in from across the country. It was clear that the government could no longer pretend the situation was contained. Meanwhile, opposition leaders sensed an opportunity they had not expected to arrive so abruptly. They held their own late-night discussions, debating how far to push the government, how loudly to echo Farage's demand, and whether the political tides were shifting in their favour. For months, they had criticised the government's direction. Now, suddenly, they had a powerful moment to rally behind, a challenge that had rattled the nation and exposed cracks in the ruling party's confidence. But even they approached the moment with caution. The political stakes were too high and one misstep could turn the entire country against them. Farage, however, remained curiously silent after leaving Parliament, while others scrambled to control the narrative. He made no further statements, no interviews, no social media posts, and yet his silence only amplified the tension. It was as if he knew the government's reaction mattered more than anything he could say now. His demand had been made, his challenge had landed. And his decision to step back allowed the public and Parliament to decide for themselves whether his words represented frustration, a warning, or the spark of a new political shift. But as the night deepened, public pressure intensified, polling phone lines were overwhelmed, newsrooms reported record viewer numbers, people gathered in pubs, cafes and living rooms discussing what should happen next. Some argued passionately that the government had lost the nation's trust. Others insisted that calling for an election now would be reckless. But regardless of opinion, one sentiment echoed across the country. The government could not hide from this moment forever. Farage's demand had forced a national confrontation with questions that had been avoided for far too long. Back in Parliament, a small group of senior MPs met in a dimly lit office, discussing the possibility that the government might face internal pressure from within its own ranks. A few members had already begun expressing doubts privately. They feared that the government's hesitance during the debate made them appear unsteady at a critical moment. And with public frustration rising, they worried that remaining silent would only fuel further discontent. These MPs understood that political survival often depended not on loyalty, but on timing. And right now, time was slipping away. Near midnight, the Prime Minister returned to the Commons chamber, now empty and quiet. The energy of the day reduced to a lingering echo. They walked slowly down the central aisle, staring up at the Speaker's chair, the place where order had barely held against the weight of Farage's demand. The Prime Minister paused, reflecting on how quickly the day had spiralled, how one speech, one challenge had disrupted the government's grip on stability. The silence of the chamber felt heavy, almost accusatory, as if reminding them of the responsibility that could no longer be delayed. Across the country, people awaited an answer, politicians prepared for what tomorrow might bring. Allies whispered of strategy, opponents sharpened their arguments, and at the centre of it all, Farage's words echoed repeatedly in the minds of millions. If this government cannot lead, the British people must choose who can. Those words now hovered over the nation like a storm cloud, impossible to outrun, impossible to ignore. With dawn approaching and the air thick with uncertainty, one truth had become undeniable. The demand for an immediate election had left Parliament shaken, the government cornered, and the public waiting for clarity. Whether the Prime Minister would confront the moment or attempt to delay it further remained unknown. But the pressure was building, and the cracks were widening. And the question left hanging over the entire nation was simple, yet explosive. Would the government stand firm, or was Britain on the edge of being thrust into its most unexpected election battle in years?